Hi everybody, I'm Paul Mueller. Thanks for joining us here on WFLA.com and my Facebook page, WFLA Paul Mueller. I'm here at the Pasco County Sheriff's Office this afternoon. It's just about 3 p.m. We're waiting on Sheriff Chris Nacco to address the media. You can see we're all set up right here. This is in connection to a story we brought you at the end of last month. A 2-year-old boy drowned just in a pond that was just 150 feet away from his own home in Hudson. He drowned in 4 feet of water. The major update to this story today is that they've arrested his mother, Roxanne Potts. I want to show you a picture of her right now. This is her, Roxanne Potts. She was arrested this morning. We'll go from that picture to her son. There he is. This is 2-year-old Clayton Foskey. Clayton Foskey died that night. He wandered away from the family's home around 7 p.m. And there was a massive search, as you might imagine, for a 2-year-old boy, not only by the Sheriff's Department on the ground as well as their aviation unit as well, but there was a massive search from neighbors who just heard the news that this 2-year-old boy, the toddler on the street, went missing from the house, and everyone just came out together to search for this child. And again, this morning the sheriff made the arrest of this woman, Roxanne Potts. She's now charged with child neglect. To give you a little background now about the family, both Potts and her husband have had contact, have had issues, if you will, with the Department of Child and Family Services, DCF, in the past. We don't know the information as far as that is concerned. Possibly the sheriff will give us a little more information as to that. But again, the investigation has been ongoing. I believe it was back on April 27th that little boy Clayton Foskey drowned, and today is May 12th? May 12th, right? It's been about 2 weeks now that the investigation has been ongoing. We're just waiting for the sheriff's office, for the sheriff to come out right now. But again, I want to show you the woman, the mother, that they arrested this morning, and here she is, right here. This is Roxanne Potts. She is the mother of 2-year-old Clayton Foskey. There he was. If you remember, if you were watching us that night at 11 o'clock and the following day, during our 11 p.m. newscast, we were showing you this picture because at the time, no one had any idea that this boy was found, had been found in a pond, again, just 150 feet away from his home in 4 feet of water. We were showing you these pictures as the intensive and massive search went on for the child, and then the sad news coming out about an hour after that, at around midnight, that the child had been found in the nearby lake. At that point, the Sheriff Nacco, had said that there was going to be obviously an investigation. He had called it a death investigation at the time. He didn't release very many details as to what was going on as far as the investigation was concerned. Obviously, the child had just drowned just a short while before that, and detectives obviously had to put the pieces of this case together to see what had led up. How had this child gone missing from the house? We know that there was at least one person, the mother, at the home at the time. I can't recollect for right now if there were other individuals at the home, but how could a 2-year-old toddler just wander out of the house with the mother inside? What was going on at the time? I think we might be starting the press conference rather soon. Eddie, do we? Not sure if we're going to start the press conference in a couple of minutes or not. Again, we're just waiting on Sheriff Nacco, and that's because that's really the big news of today. A child's mother who has been charged with child neglect in the drowning death of her 2-year-old son, Clayton Foskey. She was arrested again this morning, and again, just waiting for the sheriff's office, for the sheriff right now. She was arrested again this morning and faces at least 1 count of child neglect. And again, I just want to bring this story home to you. Again, the pictures of this poor child, who everyone was looking for that night. There he is right there. Short blonde hair, crew cut, didn't weigh much, wasn't that tall as a 2-year-old would be. Obviously he didn't talk, but I remember that night as I was covering the story, he did respond to his name. So if you called Clayton, that was the big hope that night, that if someone yelled the name Clayton, that a voice would appear, or I should say the boy would appear, or they may have heard his voice and may have found him. But again, this was really a team effort that night on behalf of everyone, not only from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, but just neighbors. Neighbors, and you know, if you hear that one of your neighbor's 2-year-old children is missing, you might just go out there and look for the child. Just because, you know what, if you have children of your own, what would it be like for you to lose a child like that? So again, we're just waiting for the sheriff right now to give us more details. What is it in the investigation that they found that led to this morning's arrest? What led up? Again, we do know that there have been several interactions with Roxanne Potts, that's the mother, and the husband as well with DCF. We also know that they had been arrested before, and I believe that the press conference is going to start any minute now as we await Sheriff Pasco to give us the developments today and to tell us why exactly the woman was arrested, the mother was arrested this morning. It's going to be we're going to have a live report coming to you at 4:30 this afternoon, but you can continue to stay here with us, of course, on WFLA.com and my Facebook page, WFLA Paul Mueller, for the very latest details. And again, we're just waiting to find out what was it? What are the key parts of this investigation? Again, a 2-week-long investigation. Of course, the sheriff's office wants to dot all their I's and cross all their T's to make sure that they have a rock-solid case against the mother. And we're going to get started right now. Sheriff Pasco.
All right.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're talking about 2 cases that impacted our community right here in Pasco, but we know throughout the Tampa Bay region had an impact because when you're talking about little kids, especially 2-year-olds, and their sad death that could have been avoided, it's a tragedy for all of us. The first one is we arrested today was Roxanne Potts. That is the house off the verandas off 52, which everybody's probably familiar with. That was the case that on April 27th, the evening of, the little boy Clayton Foskey had wandered from the house. During that time he wandered from the house. He actually ended up only going about 150 yards from his home. He went into a pond. He actually slipped underneath the cattails and got caught up in the cattails. And that's when one of our canine units, along with a dive team member, was able to rescue the body, but unfortunately he had been deceased. The door for him to get out was unlocked, so he was able to get out of that house. The other case has to do, we arrested Selena Warner. That was a house off of 9235 Yellow Lake Drive. At that home, there was another little boy. It was on April 20th. His name was Justin Ray. Justin Ray also went another unlocked door. He wanders into a pond that is very close proximity to home. He goes into the pond and he drowns. Fortunately, due to fire rescue and the sheriff's office, we were able to keep him alive. However, he did pass away 5 days later at the hospital. Both women are charged with child neglect with serious injury, which is a second-degree felony. I know there's been some confusion out there about aggravated child abuse. Aggravated child abuse is when you're actually, the child is beaten up, physically harmed. These children, it was a neglect case. And let me just talk about some of the consistencies in these 2 cases that are absolute tragedies. The first is neighbors and family members have told us, yes, they're admitting that, they've seen this kid wandering around the neighborhood. Their own family members within these families have said, yes, we know the child has left for hours on end, for time on end, and, the parent wasn't out searching. The other one, too, is the neighbors have responded back to us through the investigations that they've actually returned the child back to the house. And in one of the cases, they said, we returned the child after we see this little 2-year-old wandering around, and they come right back. The child comes right back out on the street. The women knowingly knew, these 2 women both knowingly knew these kids could escape from the house. And as I can tell you, I can imagine all the parents out there watching, when you have little kids, you do everything you can to safeguard the house. You're putting locks on those doors. You're barricading a house like Fort Knox, so you're not worried about people coming in, you're worried about little children leaving. The kids were seen on numerous occasions wearing the same clothes for several days. So it shows this is a neglect issue. I can imagine, when you have little kids, you're changing those kids several times a day because of what they're spilling on them, what they're getting into. You're changing their diapers. These kids were wearing the same clothes for several days. So you can see the parenting wasn't there. It was a neglect issue. The other sad part is, you talk about these two little boys. They're only 2 months apart in age. They're 2-year-old kids born 2 months apart, and their lives were unfortunately parallel in a house of neglect. And then they tragically died I think it was roughly 7 to 10 days apart from the instance of the drowning, what they went through. Both households had history of narcotics. I know some of these families have moved around a little bit, but narcotics was something that had come up in both of these households. And, the one thing we want to get out there is that, why the sheriff's office moved forward with these charges. Neglect was the issue. These were tragedies. These two little boys, had there not been neglect issue, this probably would not have happened. I can tell you these two incidents would not have happened. And we all hear of tragedies that occur, and I remember being on the scene of one where the parents were absolutely devastated because they did everything they could, and on one time that little child got out of the house and went to a pond. And that is so sad. What's so sad about these situations is that we lost two little boys, but what made it criminal is the fact we didn't have to. Had these mothers done what they needed to do to protect their children, we would not be where we are today. It also reminds us, it's getting warm out there. Kids gravitate to water. Please, for all the parents out there, take your children, teach them to learn how to swim. Do everything you can to protect your house so that the kids can't go into a pool. But most importantly, just be a parent that cares and loves about your child, and make sure that they're not wandering the street for several hours on end when they're 2 years old. And that's the biggest issue we had. And so I can tell you, it is a rough day. This is one of the sad situations we hope never happen. But at the same time, we have to uphold the law. And these detectives did an outstanding job, because I know these were very, very tough investigations. But there has to be justice for these two little boys.
Were there any other parents in the home? Why were just the mothers charged?
You guys want to go?
In the case of justice, just mom was home at the time. Mom was home at the time. Dad was actually at work during the incident, so it was just her.
Talk to us about Clayton, please, sir. Who was there at the time? Sheriff mentioned that he just got out the door. Front door, back door. Who was home at the time?
At the time that he was able to get loose, the mother was home. She was through her own admission, she was on the back porch smoking and on her phone. The paramour, which was her boyfriend, had left to get food. Knowing that he was leaving, he left, claims he locked the front door. However, it was known by the mother that the baby was able to open the lock. The secondary lock that they had installed on the door had not been locked. So while she was outside, he was able to get outside and wander down the road unnoticed for what we know at least 9 minutes before she comes out of the house.
She had no idea he was missing for 9 whole minutes.
Yes, sir.
Was she high at the time? Was she drinking? Do we know this?
I can't. No, I can't really discuss that. She did not test positive for any narcotics when we did test her.
Yeah, I've heard that the family, both the mother and father, have been arrested before. They've had interactions with DCF. Is that true?
I can't really comment on too much of the DCF investigations.
Okay, but if there were actual DCF investigations, was there a failure in the system here?
I can tell you, with Chapter 39, we can't get in much detail. We can't get into details about the siblings, about their location, where they are right now. But I can tell you, within our Chapter 39 investigation unit, there was no open cases. There was nothing open at this time. However, these people had wandered around or moved from different locations, so they were not living in Pasco during their, for a long period of time.
And he was missing for how long? Because were reporting live at 11 o'clock. He was still missing, but he got out just after 7. Is that right?
Yes, he was reported at just after 7, and I believe we located his body, I believe it was 10:59 that evening.
And again, how was it that you were able to locate the boy?
Just mainly through a lot of hard work from the community and our department and K9. Our K9 unit was able to locate several footprints on the edge of the lake. We were aware that the child was only wearing one shoe at the time due to video surveillance that we discovered from one of the neighbors. At that point, the dogs tracked to those locations, and then our dive team eventually found them.
Did you speak with the mother in detail?
I did speak with them.
Can you tell us about, not details about that conversation, but what was her mood, her demeanor as she spoke with you? Is that something that you could talk to us about?
Yeah, I can tell you she was very upset. I mean, as any parent would be if their child, was told their child had died. There's no doubt in my mind that it really is grieving her. Even today, she's, got some questions in her own mind, and she knows that some of this has fallen back on her as far as her responsibilities.
And Sheriff, is there a possibility that she could face more charges?
It's still part of the ongoing investigation. I can't get into that. But I can tell you right now, these just moving forward this much, it goes back to the hard work of our detectives. This goes back to, it's very sad. Nobody can say, it's not anything but a tragic situation all the way around. But it really goes back to holding people accountable, for a tragedy that could have been avoided. This is clearly a case of neglect. This isn't something where somebody one time, had, possibly fallen asleep and the kid gets out. This is something that has a repeated pattern. Neighbors have told us that they would consistently see these kids wandering the street and bring them back, and then the kid would go right back out again. So that's one of those things. But as moving forward, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can just tell you, that if more evidence comes out, then we'll be able to investigate further. But for everything we have right now, these are the 2 charges we have.
Warner's other children, are they still in her home?
That's what it goes back to Florida Chapter 39. I can't say what's going on with the other children.
And how many other children does she have?
That's why I don't want to get into this. Is I can just tell you that they're safe.
With Potts, has the Pasco Sheriff's Office been to that residence before and dealt with that little boy wandering away before?
With calls for service to there?
Yes.
Yes. I'll let the.
I don't really recall for the child investigations. I know there's a history of police being called to the home of her.
Can you talk a little bit
It
about
was in a different county.
the location is Hudson.
Yeah, I don't believe we had any calls out of there. They had just recently moved there.
So all these neighbors I spoke to that said they'd seen the boy out before. Nobody ever called 911 to report the child before.
Unfortunately, no.
And was that the same case? I'm sorry, with Clayton. Did neighbors call 911?
No, they didn't call.
I know that there was a 7- and a 9-year-old in Clayton's house at the time. Can you confirm that those were his siblings? Do we know are they all related?
It's really tough. I'm not trying to. We'll go back and we'll talk to the attorney, see what we can release. But with Florida Chapter 39, we have to be so careful that we protect the identity or any information about those. But if we can release it, I'll make sure we do release it.
In Warner's PC, we go out and you guys come out and say that they were, yeah.
Well, whatever's in the PC, I'll go with. I just don't want to make any comments now.
But I'm asking about Clayton's Potts' PC. It doesn't say that. Do we know how many other children she had? If you could say how many children Warner had, can you say how many children?
I want to know. I can tell you, he had 2 siblings.
And that's, Josh, I apologize. We have to be very, very careful. Chapter 39.
You were very careful that night in the press conference at midnight, and would only say it was a death investigation. And we know that it was very early. You had just found the child just a short time before that. The investigation was very fluid at that time. Did you have a sense? Did you know that there was something more to this than just the child may have just gotten out of the house somehow mistakenly, and it resulted in such a tragedy like it did.
Right, and that's the one thing. The reason why it took some time before we put out there the information that the child had passed away was, one, we have to make sure that the family's informed. We did have victim advocates out there to make sure that for the family that, you know, because we understand they're grieving. They lost a little boy. At the same time is talking to the investigators at that point, we realized there may be more to the story than what we had at the time. At that time, we also had some confirmation from neighbors that were relying, you know, providing us information that, you know, was adding to the fact there may be some issues with neglect. And I can tell you, those neighbors up there during the night at search were absolutely fantastic. There was actually individuals that had gone to that pond where we found him, and they had been there a short time before, and the reason why they didn't see him was because he had gone under. And it was only after a little while that our canine and everybody else was able to recover. So I can say some of that information we got that time led us to believe there's more to this case than just an absolute tragedy that the child had been, you know, escaped out of the house, that there had been numerous incidents that may have happened. So that's why we wanted to make sure that whatever we release, we make sure it was accurate at the time.
And can you tell me, the man who went out, is he the biological father, or you can't tell us that?
From what I'm gathering, from what I'm being told by the mother, he is not the biological father. Evidently, he had given his last name, but was not the biological father. I don't have any evidence showing otherwise, but that's what I'm being told.
Sheriff, such a tragedy, such a tragedy, and I know everyone says that. The question is, could this have been prevented? Could it have been prevented?
Yes, and that's why these two arrests were made today. These arrests were made because there was a history of neglect. There was a history of just allowing these children to wander through the neighborhood without care or concern. And that's why they're both being charged with the neglect charges, second-degree felony with serious injury, which actually led to their deaths. So that's why we're here for it. It's one of those things that, you know, I know it's tough on our detectives, it's tough on all of us. It's tough on our community, but at the same time, there has to be people held accountable for their actions. Their lack of actions, their lack of being a vigilant parent led to these two deaths. And so it is a tragedy, and that's why they're being charged with it.
Can we get a soundbite about the bodies in Zephyr Hills?
Yeah, unfortunately, soundbite's not going to be much. It's just going to be, this morning there was a scene where two people were deceased. It is being investigated as a homicide. Once we get more information, we'll provide it, but we want to find out how those bodies.
Hi folks, I'm just walking outside to give you a recap of what we just heard inside from Sheriff Chris Nacco. So there you have it. A very, very sad case. Where there are two cases. That one where the toddler drowned, another where the toddler nearly drowned and then died just a short time later. But in this case, again, the mother, Roxanne Potts, arrested for neglect in the drowning death of her 2-year-old toddler, Clayton Foskey. It was back on April 27th, I believe, that he wandered away from the house. You heard the sheriff that he just walked right out the front door somehow while the mother was in there, that he was gone for 9 minutes, that her boyfriend had left to go to the store. So it was just the mother inside the house at the time. Clayton walked out the front door and had been gone for 9 minutes before the mother had actually noticed that her son was gone. 9 minutes. That's when she called 911, and this massive search ensued by not only the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, but by neighbors. It was, and we were out there that night, it was a massive, massive search. And now you hear the sheriff saying today, this nearly 2-week-long investigation, why did it take so long? Well, as you heard him say, that there was a history of neglect with Roxanne Potts and her 2-year-old toddler, that he wore the same clothes for days on end, that neighbors had seen him out on the streets, and they brought him back to the home. No one, as I asked the sheriff, had any neighbor ever made a 911 call? And the answer to that was no. We wanted to know where was there a break in the system here? Did someone fail this child? We know that DCF had interaction with the mother several times in the past. So the big question too is, why was the toddler still in her care? Did the system fail this toddler? That's the question that the sheriff couldn't get into because of privacy laws that won't allow him to do that. Could this have been prevented, was my question. The answer was yes. The unfortunate reality was that 2-year-old Clayton Foskey is now dead. He drowned in a pond 150 yards away from his home in just 4 feet of water. And today, this morning, his mother was arrested. We'll have more coming up for you on News Channel 8 at 4:30. Until then, thanks for joining us.